Hip mobility for kicking in Muay Thai is a very simple thing, but a lot of athletes, a lot of trainers and coaches seems to get really confused about what is a right stretch for hip mobility and what is a correct hip mobility for Muay Thai. Alan Watts has a quote basically saying that a question that's insolvable a lot of time is question asked in the wrong way. And I see this in hip mobility a lot where people constantly are talking about how do I gain more hip internal rotation? How do I gain more hip external rotation? And they're trying to find exercises, trying to find, these type of movements at end range and trying to figure out how to improve more internal, external range of motion and just never make any progress on actual kicking. And I want to use this video to really break down the type of mobility that's needed for kicking and to look at a kick in an anatomical position and to understand how do we get there in the least time. Number one, to look at the demand of hip mobility in kicking, then to look at how can we get there using 1 to 2 single stretch. Then I would also like to address a couple questions that I get asked frequently about the hip mobility for kicking. So let's get into it. First, when we look at a kick, we understand there's a couple trajectory for kicking, right? We can do the Western style, which is come up a little bit more rounder, or we can do the Thai style, which come up a little bit straighter and flip at the last second. No matter in which type of way, we know a good kick requires us to put the body weight forward and want the hip to be open. But what exactly does that mean? So when we are looking at kicking, whether it's a rear kick or whether it's a switch kick, and to truly understand mobility for kicking, let's look at this model here. So this is our hip in normal standing. And when we talk about hip internal, external rotation or any hip movement, we are talking about this acetabular joint and the femur's movement inside the joint. So this is regular standing. If we take a kick and look at the moment of turnover, we can see that what needs to happen at this very moment is that number one, my knee needs to spread apart, right? And number two is, depends on how high you kick, my knee also need to face out a little bit. And also, the most importantly, as we kick, a lot of common problem is that it's easy for me to sit back into my hip and I can't. I want to be staying tall, right? As Muay Thai 101, you always want to stay tall as you kick. So we know the hip also needs to be extended. So there you have it. When we break down the position of the turnover, we're talking about a position where the knees are open, far away from each other, and they may be facing slightly to the opposite direction. And also at the same time, I don't want hinging at the hip. I want to make sure I'm able to stay very tall in my kicking position. And once we start looking at this position, we can understand that mobility for kicking in Muay Thai simply means, do we have the mobility to achieve this position where my knees are spread out, my leg is spread out, and they're facing out slightly, and most importantly, I'm not excessively bending over at the hip joint. And there you have it. This is the position we need to achieve in kicking. Now when we're looking at this whole structure, it's easy to see that we don't have eyes in this position. These bones, they don't really know if we're kicking or if we're stretching. All they know that this open and end range position is not a familiar position, and all we need to do is create a condition to slowly and controllably progress ourselves into this position. So there you have it. That's mobility for kicking, and there are a number of ways we can get there. The first we can do is simply in a kneeling position. All I have to do is try to spread my knees apart, have them face outside. As I'm in this position, I'm actively trying to sit up and push my hip forward. Now, as I'm doing that, I'm automatically in the kicking position, and I can gradually push more and more into that position. Once it becomes easier, I simply widen my knees a little bit more. And once this becomes easier, I simply widen the knees a little bit more. That's one way to do it. Or another way to do this is by standing. A lot of you guys know me because of this stretch, this wide stance cat-cow, where I'm, again, simply opening up my knees, having them face in the opposite direction, and trying to extend at my hip and trying to push through. As it gets easier, what do? I progress it. And I push more, and I push more, and I push more. If I just spend some time in either of these stretches, no matter it's kneeling or standing, I hang out at the edge of my mobility and I'm trying to progress a little bit by bit where I could spend 20 to 30 reps as a warm-up before my Muay Thai, or I can do it after class for 2 to 3 minutes at a time. There's really no rules here. I generally recommend for 2 to 3 second hold for 20 to 30 reps at a time. And you can do this every other day, 2 times a week, at a frequency that makes sense for you and your body. And that's it. That's hip mobility for kicking. We got there without ever have to talk about internal, external hip rotation. A common question I often get asked is how much hip internal rotation matter in kicking? And the simple answer is it really doesn't matter for kicking. And I know this is a very common stretch that people do, and I will understand why people would do this, because on surface, that position look like a turnover position, but that's really just a optical illusion created by pelvis movement. What's happening in kicking is not that we're, at the moment of kicking, we're twisting our hip bone inwards, because that's A, not very powerful, and B, just not a very stable structure. What's really happening is that we're swinging our whole pelvis forward, and our actual hip joint, it's being, like I said, open and extended, but as far as rotation goes, it's in a relatively neutral position, because adding any internal rotation to this joint is gonna mess up the whole chain of kicking. And another question people ask commonly about is, what about head kicks? Well, head kicks in nature is really not that different from a body kick. All that's different is that my knees need to spread a little bit wider and need to face out a little bit more. So it's the same exact stretch, and all you have to do is progress it into the level of a head kick. And that's really it, guys. I understand there could be a lot of question and mental gymnastic we do on, do we need hip internal external rotation? Do we need to stretch our tight glutes, tight adductor? Do we need to strengthen any weak things? End of the day, all we have to do is analyze the position of kicking and see how progressively we can take our joints and take our body into that position. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that, but also at the same time, we also have to understand that mobility is a very specific trait. When we're talking about improving mobility, we'll have to talk about the task that we improve mobility to and direction we improve mobility at. And mobility for kicking is a very, very specific type of mobility. And the best way to get there is simply by following a very specific approach instead of trying to improve general hip mobility.